Aloha, I'm Representative Joe Jordan, and welcome to Jordan's Journal. We have another show today, and I have a special guest, Colin Kippen, who is a coordinator for the Homeless Interagency Council, also known as HICH, H-I-C-H. Welcome. Thank you for joining me, Colin.
Aloha.
Aloha. So could you kind of give us a little bit of your background before you took on this position, and then what you do in this position?
Okay. I was born and raised here, went away to go to graduate school and law school, and ended up living in the Seattle area for about 20 years. And I was a trial lawyer there and a prosecutor, and I became really active in Native law. Wow. And became a tribal judge. And then I ended up working with various tribes in the Northwest. Then I came home and went to work for OHA as the land and sovereignty director, and then eventually I became the director of Hawaiian rights for OHA. And then I was recruited by our late Senator Inouye to be his senior counsel on the Indian Affairs Committee, and I did that for a few years, and then came back and ran the Native Hawaiian Education Council here for several years, and then went back again to DC to run the National Indian Education Association. So now I'm back here in DC, back here in Hawaii, working on homelessness.
Yeah, traveling back and forth in the different coasts.
Yeah. And you know, a lot of what I have done has been very similar.
Yeah.
I mean, the working in Native rights is really, a lot of it has to do with addressing some pretty big needs in terms of education and health, economic development, and a lot of the issues you see in Native country, or Indian country, or in Hawaiian society are I think really good training for some of the issues that we deal with in homelessness.
That's correct. I do know, could you give us a little bit of background about the Homeless Interagency Council?
Yeah.
How it kind of got started, where we're at, and what's the foundation for it?
So when Obama gets elected, one of the first things he does in his first term as president is he sets up the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness. Oh. And what his big idea was is that if we're going to solve homelessness, we have to realize that no one agency owns the answer.
That's true.
So it's about education, it's about health, it's about economic development, it's about jobs, it's about, you know, issues of substance abuse. All of these are parked in different agencies.
That's correct.
So his thinking was, if we want to solve it, then you need to bring all the people who have a piece of the answer together. So he created this United States Interagency Council on Homelessness, and he put all of his secretaries who ran these various departments on this hui. And once he got that going, when our governor was elected, Governor Abercrombie was elected, thought that was a really good idea, so he replicated that model here. And he did it by executive order.
Yeah, that's correct.
And it wasn't a state statute. And so then he creates this executive order which mirrors the same approach that the federal government is taking, which is that nobody owns the answer.
That's great. We all come together.
We all come together
because
it's a little bit of everything, because each person who finds himself becoming homeless has their own story. And you know, it may be any of a number of things that have been severed in their lives or have gone sideways that put them in that situation where they've fallen into this abyss and have become homeless. So if you're going to bring them out, you got to address the reasons why they became homeless in the first place. So that's the big idea. That's what this council is. It's a hui of these various departments, the private sector and the faith-based community all working together.
So different departments. So you're talking like human services in the state, health, we have city.
Public safety.
Public safety.
Your cities and your counties.
Yeah, all our counties from our neighbor islands. Then we have the private sector with the nonprofit groups such as IHS, Partners in Care. So everybody comes to the table.
Really, and the idea is that everybody needs to be involved in this, because if they're not involved in this, how are you going to solve this issue?
Correct.
Because it's bigger than any one agency could ever resolve by itself.
And then we're also looking at, like, it could be youth, it could be families, it could be couples, it could be elderly. So this is broad spectrum, and like you were saying earlier, you know, substance abuse, maybe job issues. So when we're really looking at this, we're looking at everybody's little piece to share. And we all come to the table.
Right.
How long have we been meeting?
We have had, well, there were some meetings when it was an executive council and there were meetings there. We've had 2 official meetings, one in September and one recently in the middle of December.
That's after the
That's after we became a state statute. So what happened is this good idea was transported over to the legislature. The legislature said, this is a great idea, we want to endorse it. So they created by state statute this Hawaii Interagency Council on Homelessness.
But they were, I guess, unofficially or collectively meeting prior to that for maybe about a year and a half?
They had been meeting for about a year and a half. And one of the first things they did was to create a 90-day plan to end homelessness.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And that was sort of a breakout strategy. Let's try this strategy right now to see what we can do to marshal our forces to make something happen. The sense was that wasn't the full answer, but that was a piece of important work that needed to get done to demonstrate to people that we can do something together that we can't do alone.
That's correct. So then from there, I guess we started moving to doing some planning.
We do. What we did is so there was a planning effort that was ongoing. So we took that plan and we brought it to our meeting in September and we discussed it and we moved to adopt it.
Okay.
And then we came back again in December and had some more conversations about what are the specific things we need to do to organize ourselves to build a plan. Now, we're supposed to come up with a 10-year plan. But if you've ever noticed, a 10-year plan is really a difficult thing to do because, you could pretty much figure out what you're going to do this year and maybe next year. But what happens after that? So what we've decided that we want to do is we really want to drill down on what we're going to do in the next 2 years.
Oh, okay.
And so that's the sort of the mana'o, that's the sort of the intention behind the way we're working the plan. And that is, 10 years is a long way out there. We're going to have some big ideas that we want to see accomplished, but we're really planning to drill down over the next 2 years, come up with specific things, specific action steps we want to accomplish, make sure that we have ways to measure our progress, because if you can't measure it, you're probably not going to be able to accomplish it.
That's
so you've got to have some measures, and they got to be tied to what we want to accomplish, and then have a timeline. So that when we get together, the question will be, well, we were supposed to do A, B, and C. How are we doing on that?
So what I'm kind of hearing is maybe a 10-year plan of possibly ending homeless or taking it to a very, very small number, right?
The intention is to end homelessness. But I could tell you that homelessness is really difficult to answer and resolve because the causes of why a person becomes homeless are so varied. And in some cases, it may have to do with issues of health, developmental disabilities. It may be mental health issues involved. It may be the loss of sobriety, maybe alcohol or drugs involved. It may be simply issues having to do with losing a job. And in my opinion, those kinds of issues where people find themselves homeless, those are the things that we could do something about right now. But these other issues that have to get into the area of sort of individual sort of resiliency and individual safety or health or these sort of much more difficult issues. If you're dealing with those kinds of issues, you just have to be realistic in terms of what it is you can accomplish in order to move someone out of homelessness.
So then we're looking at, okay, a possibly 10-year plan, and what you're saying is what we're gonna try and do in the next 1 to 2 years, and then kind of evaluate that to see, okay, are we a little bit ahead of the game or behind the game, and how do you keep adjusting going forward? That's kind of what I'm hearing, right?
That is what you're hearing, and when the governor and the legislature strategically thought about creating this Hawaii Interagency Council on Homelessness, one of the big ideas was to sort of capture the energy of what was happening at the federal level. And what the federal government was trying to do was to say that we need a coordinated approach in order to address this. So that's why all these secretaries from all these departments are joining together. A couple of things I wanted to note about this United States Interagency Council on Homelessness. The chairman of that group for the next year is General Shinseki. General Chiseke from Hawaii, who's also the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. He is the chair of this United States Interagency Council on Homelessness. So there was some thought into put into this. So when we created it, one of the ideas was we want to align ourselves with the funding and the sets of data and best practices that are being developed and culled at the federal level. So all of that information is information we're accessing to be able to understand what what's the best way of doing the things that we need to do.
Yeah. So then some of that, we already have the open communication with these, and they already understand the issues of the islands.
They do.
With Shinseki. Then we also have all that data we can pull down from the Federal Interagency Council.
Yes.
And then we also have the support from the Western region, right? That'll also give us that extra leg up. So it's not us just starting from these ground, platform levels. I mean, we've already got some stuff built in to where we're going to be ahead of where somebody would say, oh, you might fail at this. But I think we've got extra legs up on a lot of this information and support, right?
I think that I think the only way to really be successful is for us to just issue a call to everyone that they need to get involved in this initiative. True. Because the answer is in our communities, it's in our service providers, it's in our families, it's in individuals. And it really is about building the health and resiliency of the community. Because really, what happens when you fall into homelessness is that the immediate response from any caring person is to say, what can we do to bring that person out of homelessness? But if you don't look at the reasons, if you don't really fully consider the reasons why they became homeless in the first place, you might be able to find them a place to live, but the question will be, will they fall out of that home?
That's right.
Will they, if they have mental health issues, or if they have issues where they have a difficult time living around other human beings, will they work in an apartment unit, living next door to other people, And so there are parts to this problem which really require that you treat each individual individually. You have to be able to see what's in front of you and then figure out what is the best way to do that. And we can start to summarize, groups of people who fit different kinds of profiles, but really it is about that assessment up front to figure out who these people are, what their needs are and why they become homeless.
Yeah. And then I guess, like what you're saying is certain individuals, like if I fall into homelessness because I lost my job, those are things that we can probably take care of and solve in 5 or 6 months.
Right.
Whereas somebody fell on my sobriety, or I can't hold a job, or I have a problem with living with people around me, those need a little bit more services around them. And how do we work with our outlying, service providers and our agencies within the government to kind of, change up some of the things that we already do currently? Is that what I'm kind of hearing? That some of these thoughts moving forward, right?
That is, and in fact, at the national level, one of the key parts of their plan is they want to bring people out of homelessness as quickly as possible. Yeah. Now, we've just been conversing for 10, 15 minutes about the difficulty of addressing the social needs of an individual to make sure that if you bring them out of homelessness into a home, that they stay in the home, that they're able to make their payments if they have payments they have to make, that they're able to be a good tenant, that they're able to be a good neighbor. All of those kinds of things have to be understood and made to happen. Yeah. The national model is to house people immediately, if you can. And this is, so what it's called is a housing first model.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
And their intention is to try to get people housed as quickly as possible. Now, that is a difficult issue because the normal way that we proceed in our community is that we find an individual or a family who is homeless. We try to get them into an emergency shelter, and then we move them into a transitional shelter to help to stabilize their lives. And if you envision an escalator, they're on this escalator, and we're bringing them out of homelessness. And when they get to the top of the escalator, the intention is that we'll move them in to permanent housing. So after they've been in a transitional shelter, emergency shelter, and a transitional shelter, as they're moving forward, we want to eventually put them into permanent housing. the new model is we want to go onto the streets, we want to find who the homeless are, and we want to bring them out of homelessness into permanent housing as quickly as possible. Now, you're smiling, and really I understand that because that's a tall order to figure out how are you going to coordinate all of those things that you would do in a much more structured setting, such as a transitional shelter or an emergency shelter and a transitional shelter. How are you going to try to do that immediately with that person being moved into a permanent house?
And then going back to what you were saying early, each situation is very unique. So you may have somebody that can go straight right into permanent housing.
Yeah, and I think the situation that we were talking about, you know, a man who's got kids, loses his job, you know, can't make ends meet, you know, they're having a hard time surviving, so, you know, they get evicted because they might have missed a month's rent or something like similar situation. You can use your imagination on that. So they're on the streets. That person, if we could come up with, you know, short-term housing supports and helping that man find a job, you know, that would immediately solve the problem. But again, that being homeless is so destabilizing. I mean, if you just think about how do you go to work every day if you don't have a place to sleep at night? You know, if you don't have a place to take care of your, you know, normal bodily functions, to get rest.
That's correct.
You know, and to be able to have a place where you can keep your things, knowing that when you come back at the end of the day after you're working, it hasn't been rifled through or stolen. You know, those are some of the issues that folks who are homeless face.
And, you know, I mean, I've been dealing with the homeless issues for like, you know, 12, 13 years now. And I started sitting on the Interagency Council when it was an executive order, just as I was very interested in it. I've always heard that with homelessness, you want to catch them as soon as they hit it, like the day after, in order to create that success. Because the longer they're homeless, and I mean like weeks or even months, it'll take that much longer to get them back into, you know, stabilization. So is that what I'm hearing? I mean, that's what we're trying to find. How can we locate these individuals as rapidly as possible and shore up that safety net rather quickly, right?
That really is the point. I mean, we're, you know, human beings are creatures of habit. And so, you know, there are really only two kinds of habits in the world, good habits and bad habits, right? And you're making really an obvious point, which is really an important point, which is that, you know, we want to create the best possible life for people, you know, in our state. And those who find themselves homeless, you know, we have a responsibility to help. And so when we help them, we want to do that as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And again, as you suggest, you know, there may be some habits that are bad habits that need to fade away and good habits need to replace them, but being not housed, when you think of all of the issues that one is faced with when one becomes homeless, are a set of circumstances that we just want to avoid.
So you're the coordinator, right? So how do they contact? If somebody was like, hey, I might have an agency or a private sector division that might want to be a part of this and helping with planning or just being somebody that wants to provide services. Is there a contact? Like, do you have?
There is, and I'm hopeful that our producer will make sure that this is on the screen. But you could call me. In fact, people do call me every day, and I get calls from community members, I get calls from homeless people, I get calls from any of a number of people who are interested in this issue. I also have an email address, which I hope is on the screen as I'm saying this. That email address, you can email me, and it's much easier for me to respond to email because I can do that 24/7, and I don't need to be at a phone catching that call.
Or calling somebody back at midnight. That's about the time, when your day ends,
it may be later, it may be early, you know. So so you can contact me either by phone or by email.
Okay, so you're going to be sticking around for a while, right? You're dedicated to this, and
this is a huge.
Some plant. I mean, it's huge. It really is.
It's a really exciting area too, because the answer is not owned by any one entity. The answer is owned by a whole number of folks who just need to be aware of of what others are doing and how they can augment or supplement it.
Yeah. I think, with me working with the homeless over the last 13 years, you begin to understand there is a lot of different dynamics. People will fall off the bridge and come back on and fall back off again, and it's families and it's elderly. I mean, there's a lot of, and I can see clearly we've already made some strides. We're already changing up some things for our little sliver group, such as the aging out of foster youth, some of our veterans, female veterans versus male veterans. So I think I've personally seen some strides in the last 2 years in this, and I think this is a great idea, bringing everybody to the table and leaving all their issues on the outside and coming together for this common cause. And I'm hoping that's what you're seeing too, because I do see some major changes and where we're going to go with the strategic plan and how these different steps are going to be achieved. It's not going to be one government or state agency or city agency or federal. It's everybody coming together, such as, a village comes together and raises a child. I mean, it's the same thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, and when you think about it, so the private sector might ask, well, how do I participate?
Yep.
Well, one of the ways you can participate, for example, we had an opening of a women's veterans center for homeless vets last week at YWCA, and U.S. Vets was there as well. And so, part of the issue is that those women vets are going to need places to live that are permanent once they leave this transitional shelter.
Yep.
The other thing is that they'll need jobs.
That's correct.
So there are, so the private sector, so are there job programs? Is there a willingness to hire our vets? Is there a willingness to have them as tenants? Yep. Those are some of the issues that were on the table in our conversation last week at this celebration when they were opening this veterans
and that's
center.
how our private guys can come in and say we have a program, or we have a training program for them, or we might even have housing for them,
or we might even just have, if you're a private landlord, saying, I have a unit and I'd be willing to consider renting to a homeless vet. And what's really interesting about the model is that many of the people who we're dealing with will require some assistance and counseling to make this transition from being homeless to being housed.
Yeah.
And so part of the secret recipe is that we have a secret formula is that we want to provide the necessary services to make that transition smooth and to make it lasting. So that in some sense, and I think, and I'm speaking now to the private sector, it is a better investment if you have a rental unit, for example, to rent to someone who has come through the programs that are in our community, because you'll have someone to be an interface to help make sure that that individual is stabilized and is a good tenant, as opposed to just taking your chances in a market with no one there that you can really rely upon to assist you in case there are communication issues or other issues that might arise.
Yeah, so there's some sort of support network with these individuals because of the Homeless Interagency and our different programs that are going to be running through there, and definitely the next 10 years. Yeah, wow. I'm really excited about this. I'm excited about where we're going to go, and I'm glad you're on board, and especially with your background, because we do understand that a large populace of the homeless is Native Hawaiians. And that's something we need to really focus on and address. And I think that's been one of our key topics in these conversations also. It goes across the board, but the largest segment is Native Hawaiians, and how do we address those issues?
And the question of Native Hawaiians with families.
That's right.
So you have children being brought up in poverty and being homeless. So that just affects so many issues in terms of development, in terms of education, in terms of safety. Yeah. All of those things, and we can solve this problem. Yeah, we just all have to chip in. And actually, the model is like the kids' story. Best times was when my kids were little. I used to read to them, and one of their favorite stories was "Soup from a Stone." And what it is about this it's an animal actually who wants to make a soup for her friends. And she doesn't have any ingredients, but she does have a stone, and she has a pot. So she goes around to the neighborhood, and all the animals come together. And what she does, and I remember this because I read this story probably 50 times to my kids. And she goes around the neighborhood, and what she says to all of the other animals is that, you know, I'm making a soup. And they say, what are you making? She says, I'm making stone soup. And they all say, well, what is that? And they say, well, what do you have? And they all put what they have into the pot. And, you know, you end up with a feast, right? But it starts out with just the idea that, you know, you can build something out of nothing.
That's correct.
So we just need to realize that there's a lot of strength in our community. Yeah. And so, you know, falling asleep reading to my kids really did pay off.
Well, there is. We've got lots of great light at the tunnel. And I think, you know, everybody coming together is going to really work on this issue to definitely, if not end it in 10 years, reduce it to where it's very minute. So we're going to run out of time here, but I'd really like to thank you. Thank you first for coming on and being the chair. I want to call you the chair of our Homeless Interagency Council, and you still have my support. I'll be attending and working with you as best as I can, but I'd like to thank you for joining us today and showing your mana'o on this Interagency Council, and maybe I'll bring you back when we get a little bit further down the road with some of our projects.
Love to come back.
Okay, so I'd like to say aloha for now, and thank you for joining us on Jordan's Journal.